discovery, Lewis and Clark. We headed across the country, west of the Pacific. On the way back, I met a couple trappers. I decided I wanted to take up trapping. So I went to Lewis and Clark and asked them for a release from my contract, which they reluctantly agreed to. They only did it on condition that nobody else in the company would want to leave. And after I got the rest of them to agree to stay, then they let me go. Well, I didn't stay with those two guys very long. Then I hired on with the Missouri Fur Company. The Missouri Fur Company had a trading post. They wanted to trade with the Indians in the area. This was in what you call now Montana. So I went up to talk to the Crows. And I stayed with the Crows for a number of months, years. I was there a long time talking to the Crows. I learned to speak their language. And in the process, I learned Blackfoot as well. Now the Blackfoot was a neighboring tribe there. They occupy Idaho and Montana. And they weren't very hospitable, I guess you'd say. In fact, they were downright ornery. You didn't want to get caught in Blackfoot country. Well, about 1807, I took up with a fellow named John Potts, and we started trapping in the Blackfoot area. We'd put our traps out in the evening, or we'd go back early morning and check them, and gather them up if we needed to, and then we'd hide out during the day because we didn't want to get caught. Well, one morning we're going down this little creek. We're on the Jefferson Fork of the Yellowstone River. Going down this creek, it wasn't real big. We're picking up traps and checking traps. Come around the bend, and lo and behold, there's 400 Blackfoot right there on the side of the river. Well, they called us in. We're in our canoe. I was in the front, so I headed it in the shore. I thought the best thing to do was just go in and talk to them. As soon as we got to shore, one of the Indians reached down and picked up Potts' rifle. Lights got a hold of it and set it back to Potts, and then I got out. As soon as I stepped out, Potts pushed back into the stream. I told him, come on in, come on in. And he said, I remember to this day, he said, they'd be fixing to kill this child the same as they'd be fixing to kill you. He wouldn't come in, and all at once an Indian stepped up and shot an arrow into his chest. He called out, I'm wounded. Then he raised his rifle up and shot the Indian that shot him. Then he was made a riddle up. After they'd all shot an arrow into him, one of them went out and grabbed the canoe and brought it in, and they cut him to pieces. They just hacked him into pieces and just kind of generally got riled up. Well, they grabbed me and stripped me right down naked and tied me to a tree. Then they started deciding how they're going to kill me. All at once, the chief got an idea. So he silenced all their conversation and walked over to me and he said, are you a fast runner? Well, I'd heard of this before. I knew what was coming. Are you a fast runner? So I said, no, not among my people. Which was to say, but I can beat any one of you. Well, he liked that idea. Kind of tickled me. He says, great. So he untied me backside of the tree and he led me off about 400 yards. Then he cut me loose and he said, save yourself if you can. And I took off running. And I had all those young braves behind me. And I commenced to running. Now I was about 6 miles from the trees in the creek over there on the Jefferson Fork. And I thought if I can get across this plain and into the trees, I've got a chance. Well, I always thought I was a pretty good runner, and all my friends told me I was fast. And I ran. I ran harder than I'd ever run before. And after I got about 4 miles across and hadn't been caught, I looked back. And there was only one of them that was gaining on me. The rest had dropped way back. But one guy was within 100 yards of me. That gave me some hope. I thought I might get there. So I ran a little harder. When I was about a mile from the creek, I could hear his footsteps behind me. I glanced over my shoulder and he wasn't 20 yards behind me. He was carrying a spear. And I thought at any moment I'm going to get hit with that spear. Well, I'd been running pretty hard and my nose started bleeding. And I had blood all down my chest. And so I decided my only hope was to take him on. So I slammed on the brakes and turned around sunlight and threw my arms up. And it startled him so bad, he tried to throw the spear, but he tripped and he jammed that spear into the ground and broke it right there in his hand. And I was back on him and I gathered up the spear in and I drove it through him, pinned him to the ground there. And then I took off. Well, I knew when the rest of them caught up, I could hear them. And they kind of gathered up there around the body of their friend, and then they come looking. Well, I got to the river, and in the river there was a small island, and the logs had been coming down. Now this is April, this is early spring. It's cold, there's ice in the water. But there was a log jam, been kind of up there in the high water, pushed up against this little island. So I got out there under the water and got up under this log jam. I found a place where I could get my head out and I could breathe. And there I stayed. They looked all over. They even came out to the log jam and drove their spears down in it, but they couldn't find me. It was thick enough and enough of it that I could stay hidden there. Well, I stayed there all day. I got to worrying that they'd set fire to that thing and then I'd be in trouble, but they never did. They stayed the whole day. Well, when it got dark, I thought, you know, there's only one pass into this valley, and they'll be waiting there for me. So I got out of the logs and I actually went down the river a couple of miles, almost back to where we were caught, before I got out. And then I worked my way to the far end of the valley and went over the mountain. I climbed up there most of the night, and when it got morning, I hid up and stayed hidden during the daylight. And then in the night, I went over the top and down the other side. It took me 7 days to get back to the fort. I was sunburned. I was naked. I had all kinds of cactus spines in my feet that I picked up when I was running. I was in real bad shape. I didn't have a thing with me to catch anything to eat. And when I got there, my friends didn't even know who I was. But I convinced them it was me. And that was the John Colter story. That's the one you know. Running for my life. There's a chapter 2 to this that most people don't know. You know, when I was running, when I was trying to get away, I actually started praying. And I said, please, God, get me out of this. If you do, I'll leave this country and never come back. Well, he got me out of it, but I didn't keep the promise. I didn't leave. And I got thinking about those traps. When we come around that bend and saw those Indians, I had 15 or 20 traps right there in the canoe, and I just picked them up and set them over the side of the canoe and dropped them in the water. I was thinking I'll pick them up later. The Blackfeet get them, they'll keep them, but I can come back and pick them up later. I kept thinking about them. They're worth $5 a piece in the mountains. And that's a tremendous amount of money in 1807. Well, I went back to get the traps. I slipped back into that valley. The first night in, I built a little tiny fire and I cooked myself some dinner. And there alone in the darkness, that little bit of fire going, I heard something. I heard something real familiar. And with that double click, I kicked myself out away from the fire, away from the light, rolled over backwards and ran away from the fire. Well, I went out the same way I'd gone out before. Went up and over that Putt-Licking Mountain. I lost my gun, I lost my gear, I lost everything again. And once again, I said, get me out of this, and I will leave this country. And I did. I've got my canoe and I paddled it down to St. Louis. Went down the Missouri River, a distance of 3,000 miles by canoe. And I kept my promise. I left the mountains and I stayed out.